Guys, my name is Carolyn and welcome to my channel C2C Legends. Here we talk about some of the gossip and notoriety surrounding some of US history's lesser known figures and take a glimpse into their exciting and often drama-filled lives. If you, like myself, are interested in historical lives and legends from sea to shining sea, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you can be alerted when I drop new content every week. So, guys, get cozy for story time because this week we are talking about Baseball Hall of Famer Oscar Charleston. Warning: the subject matter in this video contains violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Oscar McKinley Charleston was born in Indianapolis, Indiana on October 14th, 1896. The Charleston family was large, and at the time Oscar was born, he already had six older brothers and sisters. His parents, Tom and Mary, would go on to have four more children, giving Oscar a total of 10 siblings. During his childhood, the Charlestons would move around frequently, but they would always stay in and around the Indianapolis area. His father was a construction worker and would relocate the family based on their current financial situation, as well as work convenience. Oscar's young life was far from perfect. Because of the continuous stress of having such a large family, inconsistent work, and perpetual moving, the family was rumored to have had volatile tempers. Oscar's mother, Mary, was even accused of raising an axe at a police deputy. Although I could not find any verifiable record of the event, it is likely that this was a vilifying rumor created due to the social condition of the time. In the early 1900s, as you might imagine if you're familiar with US history, Indiana was relatively segregated. So the different ethnic groups that made up American society at the time were divided and had their own neighborhoods, entertainment venues, sports leagues, and businesses. This kind of segregation is often referred to as separate but equal. The stigmas and biases surrounding Black Americans would haunt Oscar throughout his life and future baseball career. Oscar's love for baseball was pretty consuming for him. During his days at school, he would look forward to a late afternoon of playing ball with his brothers. The brothers were spirited competitors, and sometimes tempers would boil over. Due to their hot headed natures, they would find themselves in small scuffles and skirmishes, which would sometimes result in their arrest or police intervention. By the time they were adults, Oscar's brothers, Roy, Ben, and Casper, had all had run ins with law enforcement. Oscar finished junior high school, what we now refer to as middle school, when he was 13, and he didn't have very much interest in going to high school. Instead, he dropped out and chose to work odd jobs for the next 2 years, one of which was a job as a bat boy for Indiana's premier black minor league baseball team called the Indianapolis ABCs. A bat boy's job was to run and grab bats after they were thrown by the batter and to gather the baseballs and equipment during and after practices. By the time he was 15, Oscar had decided that he was ready for a life change, and he hoped he could find an opportunity to play baseball in a more official capacity. So he set out to join the Army in order to maybe have a chance at playing ball for the military. He even lied and told recruiters he was 18 in order to join, which was something that was much easier to do those days because the requirements were less stringent than they are today. He was also relatively tall and muscular and probably looked a bit older than he actually was. So Oscar was enlisted and assigned to Company B of the 24th Infantry Regiment, and he was deployed to the Philippines, where he played the position of pitcher for the official regimental team. Quickly, members of his infantry took notice of his natural talent and passion for the sport, and he was selected to play in a military all star game where he pitched a one hit shutout. If you're not very familiar with baseball, that basically means that for every pitch he threw that game, only one of the balls were legally hit by the other team. And he wasn't too shabby when he was up to bat either. He was a left handed batter, and he was fast and agile and could run the field easily. Oscar would serve 4 years in the U.S. Army before being honorably discharged in 1915. As soon as Oscar returned home to his old stomping grounds in Indiana, he joined the Indianapolis ABCs, this time as a teammate, with his bat boy days far behind him. They hired him on for $50 a month, which would be equivalent to about $1,400 a month today. In his first game with the ABCs, Oscar pitched a shutout again. His fastball was so fast the other team's batters couldn't keep up, and he struck out 9 of the opposite team's players. Toward the end of the 1915 season, the minor leagues decided to put on a series of interracial games where the Indianapolis ABCs would play a team of white players who were composed partly of major leaguers. At the time, the major leagues were segregated and there were no Black American major league teams. On October 24th, 1915, Oscar was playing in an interracial game. While he was pitching, there was an argument between one of the players and the umpire. For clarification, an umpire is the officiate of a baseball game. They ensure that rules and regulations are followed and that scores are recorded correctly. So the umpire and Oscar's teammate were arguing over a call, and Oscar saw this from the pitcher's mound in center field. Unfortunately, there's not much information about the dispute, but something was said or done that led to Oscar running in from center field and punching the umpire, knocking him to the ground. The shock of witnessing a black man hit a white man washed over the audience of baseball players, coaches, and fans who all scrambled chaotically to get a closer view of the altercation. Realizing what he had just done and seeing the mob of people headed toward him, Oscar turned and ran. The police would later catch him, however, and he was arrested. Oscar was later released on bond. The publicity of the altercation led to the owner of the Indianapolis ABCs, a man named C.I. Taylor, pictured here, having to issue a statement where he apologized for Oscar's actions. Oscar also released a statement where he apologized, saying, quote, "I cannot find the words in my vocabulary that will express my regret." Shortly after, the 1915 American baseball season would come to an end, and the Indianapolis ABCs would travel to Cuba to play internationally, and Oscar went along with them. During his time in Cuba, it's said that Oscar was still struggling to control his temper on the field, and by the time the ABCs returned to the U.S., Oscar had been fired. But that didn't keep him from playing ball, of course. And in 1916, he joined a New York team called the Lincoln Giants. Just a few short months later, though, the Indianapolis ABCs extended an invitation for Oscar to return to their team, which he did. He would go on to help his home team win game after game, playing several positions like center field, pitcher, and even outfield, and he excelled no matter which position he was in. During the following offseason, Oscar would work as a grocery store clerk. And in 1917, he met an 18-year-old woman from a prestigious family named Hazel Grubbs. Her father was a school principal named William E. Grubbs, who was very well respected in the Indiana Black community. In spite of their differences in social standing and upbringing, the two of them were swept into a whirlwind romance, and later that year, they would marry. Even though Hazel was from a prominent family and Oscar was an up and coming minor league baseball star, their union was not mentioned in any Black publication. There's not much information about how the two of them met or what led them to marry each other, but we do know that the honeymoon period did not last for long. By 1918, the two of them were separated, and by 1921, they were divorced. Inversely, Oscar's baseball career was on an ever climbing high. During the first year of his marriage in 1917, his batting average was more than 50% higher than the overall league average. At the same time that his career was ascending, the United States entered into World War I, and Oscar registered for the draft on June 5th, 1917. Because of this, he would not be able to play in Cuba during the off season that year. He was back at it again during the 1918 American baseball season, however. He remained at the top of his game. He could run 220 yards in just 23 seconds, and his agility allowed him to easily play the field. He was making incredible catches as a center fielder, and his fan base was growing larger every game. But his season was cut short when he was called to duty for the U.S. Army. He was sent to an Army boot camp called Camp Dodge, pictured here in Johnston, Iowa. In the camp, he showed strong leadership ability, resilience, and perseverance. So he was selected to train for an officer position at a school called the Colored Students Infantry Officer Training School, located in Arkansas. Before he was able to complete his training, though, World War I came to an end, and Oscar was honorably discharged from the military once again. When he was released from the Army, he immediately returned to baseball and signed with the team owned by this man pictured in the center, Rube Foster, called the American Giants. Rube is also a Hall of Famer and baseball great. Oscar would play center fielder for the American Giants, and he was gaining notoriety for his mind blowing catches and his incredible plays when their team was up to bat. The media and press outlets would refer to his catches as hair raising, and at the end of his 1919 season, reporters for the Chicago Defender declared him to be the best baseball player in the world. They even said that he played better than this man, Ty Cobb, who was a major league center fielder and was widely considered at the time to be the best who had ever played the position. The owner of the American Giants, Rube Foster, was praised for taking the traditionally hot headed Charleston and converting him into a more even tempered player. Oscar was elated by the comparison to Ty Cobb, and he would even cut out articles comparing the two of them and scrapbooking them. As the 1919 season came to an end, Oscar's career was on the ascent, and he was reveling in his growing fan base and positive media attention. In 1920, the Negro National League was created, and Oscar would once again sign with his home team, the Indianapolis ABCs. The press and fans were anticipating that he would have an incredible season, and Oscar did not disappoint. He continued with his awe inspiring plays and catches. His on base percentage was 76% higher than the league average. The man was on fire. In one particularly notable game, his team was leading 4-2, and they were in the last inning of the game. The opposite team had runners on bases 2 and 3, and if both of those runners had made it to home base, it would tie the game at 4-4. In the last few minutes of the ninth inning, a man named Jose Blanc stepped up to bat. He was his team's last hope at tying the game. Now, in baseball, if someone on the defending team catches a ball right out of the air without it ever touching the ground, the batter is automatically out. Jose hit an incredibly fast ball right out to center field where Oscar was positioned. In an epic display of skill and style, Oscar turned his back to the ball, opened his mitt, turned his arm behind him, and caught the ball, winning the game. His teammates and fans rushed toward him in celebration, shouting and cheering. Some of his fans even began throwing money in his direction in excitement and appreciation. Oscar was now a hot commodity, and other minor league baseball teams were taking notice. The St. Louis Giants made an offer of $500 a month, which would be the equivalent of about $7,800 a month today. Financially, it was a far cry from the mere $50 he was being paid by the ABCs originally, and it was an even higher income than some of the major league players were getting, something that Oscar would mention more than a couple of times. And he would cut out clippings of articles that said that he got paid more than big names like Babe Ruth and add them to his scrapbook. His 1921 season was once again impeccable, and everyone was talking about his prowess on the baseball field. Some press outlets would even refer to him as the quote, colored Babe Ruth. At the time, Babe Ruth was the biggest star in baseball. When the end of the season came, Oscar traveled to Los Angeles to play in the California Winter League, showing off his talent and skill on the field. And by the time the California Winter League season had come to an end, he'd won over the press, who declared him the second best baseball player in the world behind Babe Ruth. When his time in California was over, he traveled back home to Indiana and once again signed up with the Indianapolis ABCs. Alongside major hitters like Ben Taylor, who's pictured here, Oscar helped his team win game after game, and his stats just kept exceeding those of the previous year. By the end of the 1922 season, Oscar had been declared, quote, the best player in the Negro Leagues in 1921 through 22. Later, in 1922, Oscar met and married a school teacher and widow named Jane Howard, pictured here next to Oscar. Howard would travel with Oscar to Cuba during the 1922 and 23 winter season. At the time, Oscar was at the height of fame in Cuba, and he was often seen in public with several different women, none of whom were his wife. This, of course, opened the door to speculation that he was being unfaithful to Jane. It seems that in private, the couple would also face marital challenges. One of the major points of contention between them was that Jane was not a big fan of baseball and didn't share any of her husband's interest in the sport. But for Oscar, baseball was everything. He lived it, breathed it, and spent nearly every day of his life pushing himself to greater heights for the love of baseball. They would separate from each other 17 years after they were married, and Oscar would even file for divorce in 1941. But Jane did not agree with the concept of divorce and refused to agree to it. The divorce case was officially dismissed on March 31st, 1942, and the couple would remain married but separated for the rest of their lives. Due to a series of changes with the ABCs and the Negro National League, Oscar was traded several times over the next few seasons. He was playing in a very competitive interracial game in October of 1924, and at one point, the umpire made a call that Oscar did not agree with, and a heated exchange ensued, which resulted in Oscar swinging to hit the umpire. The umpire evaded the punch and then returned with his own punch, which connected with Oscar's face, and then he had him thrown out of the game. Despite this hot-headed exchange, Oscar was still declared the best Negro League player in 1923 and 24 because his impressive stats were just undisputed. From the years 1919 to 1925, he secured his place as one of the most dominant baseball players in history. During the 1925 offseason, Oscar again traveled to play in Cuba internationally. He was a big star in Cuba. People would even say that he was able to take down a whole team on his own. While in Cuba, he played for a team called the Santa Clara Leopards. The Leopards were the most well known team in their country, kind of like how the Yankees were here in the US. Oscar led the team to victory, and after just a half a season, it was already determined that the Leopards would win the Cuban League's national title. Oscar was all the talk in Cuban newspapers, who referred to him as the best player in the league. Nonetheless, his hot temper saw him make Cuban headlines when playing in a game on January 19th, 1924. He slid onto a base, feet first, and hit the player guarding the base with the bottom of his cleat. The other player's brother, who was a soldier, jumped out of the stands and charged onto the field in Oscar's direction. This encouraged the other soldiers there to also run onto the field to confront Oscar, and a small scuffle followed. The fight was broken up, and Oscar did his best to remain cool and finish out the game, but that didn't keep the media from talking about it when it was all over. The press had a field day, labeling Oscar as an angry baseball player with a bad temper. But this time, Oscar's friends came to his defense, calling him a perfect gentleman who had been involved in an unfortunate situation. Charleston even had to meet with Cuban military leaders and explain what had happened and apologize. The military accepted that it was an unfortunate happening and chose not to punish him for defending himself. For the next couple of seasons, Oscar would sign with the Homestead Grays and continued to play at a high level, even as he got into his 30s in age. With Oscar on the team, the Homestead Grays would go from a small town team to leaders in the league. On January 28, 1932, Oscar was hired as player manager for the Pittsburgh Crawfords. He aided in recruiting some of the most iconic players, big names like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. But even with a full team of strong Hall of Fame players, Oscar stood out because he was so versatile. Not only was he good in center field and outfield, but he was an excellent batter and talented athlete. Oscar was a fan favorite, and they loved his energy, his style, and his skill. For the next 4 seasons, Oscar and Satchel would dominate on the field and reach personal best statistically. And the two of them received multiple best player accolades and a lot of positive media attention. Oscar would continue to play and manage for the Crawfords for about 7 years before baseball again changed with the times. For the first time ever in 1945, Major League integration happened, and black baseball players and teams were allowed to play in the major leagues, and the United States League was established. A man named Branch Rickey, pictured here, who was the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, reached out to Oscar for assistance in finding black baseball players that could play in the major leagues. And then he hired Oscar as general manager of the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers, an all black Major League Baseball team. Unfortunately, though, the United States League would discontinue after its second baseball season, and Oscar would return to the Negro Leagues, this time as an umpire. During the off season in 1935, Oscar traveled down to Florida. According to stories told by friends of his, Charleston's temper resurfaced when they were confronted by a Ku Klux Klan member. Their verbal altercation escalated when Oscar yanked the hood off of the Klansman. However, there's no other information about this incident or what transpired after. In 1948, Oscar was hired by this man, Ed Bolden, to manage the Philadelphia Stars, a black minor league team. Since the major leagues had been integrated, a lot of the star minor league players were leaving the Negro leagues to play in the more official major leagues, and it was more difficult to sign new players. He managed for the Stars for 3 seasons, and he was said to have done a great job managing the team. The traditionally rowdy group of players had grown into a respectable organization and were even nicknamed the Saints in the press due to their professional and honorable behavior. Oscar, who had once been a hothead himself, was now in his 50s, and he'd grown into a calm and easygoing disposition. In 1952, the Philadelphia Stars disbanded, and for the first time in his entire baseball career, Oscar took the next season off. He would return in 1954 as the manager for the Indianapolis Clowns, and in August, he would lead them to a Negro American League championship. But tragedy would strike. Just a couple short months later, in the end of September of that same year, Oscar would suffer a heart attack or stroke. Then a few days later, Oscar would take a major fall down a flight of steps. He was left paralyzed from the waist down and in dire condition. Although his doctors did have hope that he would survive, sadly, Oscar would succumb to his injuries on October 5th, 1954, just 9 days before his 58th birthday. He would leave behind a complex legacy as one of the best and most versatile all around baseball players in history. On the field, he had a fiery temper with a tendency to throw punches in the heat of competition. And off the field, he was said to be a kind, caring, and generous man. Unfortunately, he is one of those greats that is often left out of the history books, and part of that is because he left behind no children to promote his legacy, and according to my research, most of his siblings never had children either. However, he was recognized for his accomplishments in the sport of baseball. In 1976, Oscar was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and 4 years after that, in 1981, he was inducted into the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame. And he even had a park named after him in Indianapolis called Oscar Charleston Park. In recent years, he is once again being discussed as one of the greatest baseball players in history. And that's all that I have for you guys today. So, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really hope you enjoyed learning about this baseball icon. And I appreciate you guys being so patient with me. I know I didn't post last weekend, but I hope that you moms out there had a wonderful Mother's Day and that you were spoiled by your loved ones. When I was researching Oscar's story, there was just so much information. So I kind of narrowed it down to the more pivotal moments in his life. And I really hope you all enjoyed it. Talk to me in the comments. Let me know how you feel about Oscar's legacy. And make sure to leave a smiley face so that I know that you made it to the end of this video. And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep bringing you U.S. history stories from sea to shining sea. Thanks, guys. Bye.